Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So today we will be beginning the book number 5 of the Buddha's Dhamma. So far we have completed the previous 4 books of the Buddha's Dhamma, and as we know that the Buddha's Dhamma is divided into 8 books, and the remaining 4 books are as equally important as the previous 4 books. When we have been studying the previous 4 books of the Buddha's Dhamma, there we have seen very exhaustively the Baba Sahib Ambedkar's thoughts on Buddha and the Dhamma. And we have seen in the Buddha's Dhamma a brief biography of the Buddha. And as we proceeded on to move further to study the Buddha's Dhamma, we have seen Baba Sahib Ambedkar's presentation of the Buddha's Dhamma. So far we have covered Buddha and the Dhamma. But book 5 is exclusively devoted to the Sangha. And as we know that in whenever we think about Buddhism, we think about 3 jewels or 3 Ratna or Tri-Ratna or Tri-Saran. And they are Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha. And we have in our communities a lot of discussion about what is Sangha, how Baba Sahib Ambedkar wanted to understand the role of Sangha, what is the role of a bhikkhu, and what is the role of the Buddhist organization. So we have seen this discussion in the communities across as to what is the role of the Sangha. So I think the book number 5 goes on explaining what is the Sangha. And I think that's a very important point, because as a Buddhist or those who would like to follow on the path of the Buddha, it's very important for them to understand what is Sangha and the role of Sangha, and how did Baba Sahib Ambedkar understand the role of Sangha. So this book 5, which is titled as the Sangha, is divided into 5 parts. So this is the scheme of the book 5 of the Buddha's Dhamma, which is titled as the Sangha, and it is divided into 5 parts, and we are going to look at each part. So today we will be entering into what is called the part 1, the Sangha, and there are about 8 subsections, and all these 8 subsections are divided into various verses. So to begin with, let's look at the part 1, which is titled as the Sangha of the book 5 of the Buddha and his Dhamma. So the this particular part begins with the title, the Sangha and its organization. So let me read through a few of the content of this part 1, the Sangha and its organization. The followers of the Blessed Lord were divided into 2 classes, bhikkhus and lay followers called upasakas. So this distinction between the bhikshus and the upasakas is very clear. And whenever we talk about traditional Buddhist Sangha, we talk about the 4-fold Sangha, the bhikshus, bhikshunis, upasaka and upasikas. So the verse number 2 goes like this: the bhikkhus were organized into a Sangha while the upasakas were not. Now this is a very important point. The verse number 2 is a very important point. The bhikkhus were organized into a Sangha while the upasakas were not. And according to Baba Sahib Ambedkar, this is a very important point that led to the disappearance of Buddhism in India, because there was no ceremony for the upasakas to be ordained into Buddhism. And therefore, Baba Sahib Ambedkar introduced what is called the Dhamma Diksha. And I think that's a very innovative way of keeping the Buddhist tradition alive by bringing into play what is called the Dhamma Diksha. So in the scheme of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, it's very important to have Sangha Diksha as well as Dhamma Diksha, because Dhamma Diksha continues from generation to generation the presence or the tradition of Buddhism, even when the Bhikkhu Sangha has gone. Because that is what has happened in India, as Baba Saheb Ambedkar has read through the Buddhist history of India. He said that because the Bhikshu Sangha disappeared, the Buddhists were, left with no center for guidance. And indeed, the Buddhists tried to keep the flame alive, and the Zen tradition and other traditions can be called the continuation of what has gone, into Indian history. So this second verse is very important to understand. The bhikshus were organized into a sangha, while the upasakas were not, though they were the part of the fourfold sangha. The Buddhist bhikshu is primarily a parivrajaka. This institution of parivrajaka is older than that of the Buddhist bhikshu. It's very important to understand that parivrajaka is a very important term in Buddhism, because that time there were, at the time of the Buddha, there were many people who were exploring the truth. They were exploring various paths to liberation. And we know it's very, very clearly as to how it was happening in the ancient India. The Buddha's first 5 disciples were already were already homeless. And there were many people the Buddha met in the course of his life, in the course of his teaching, that, they were, they haven't had any organization. So Buddha has, organized the floating body of those parivrajaka. So the old parivrajaka were persons who had abandoned family life and were a mere floating body of wanderers. They roamed about with a view to ascertain the truth by coming into contact with various teachers and philosophers, listening to their discourses, entering into discussion on matters of ethics, philosophy, nature, and mysticism, etc., etc. Some of the old type of parivrajaka's lived under a teacher until they found another. Others lived singly without acknowledging any master. Among these older type of parivrajaka's, there were also women wanderers. Very important point, because it was not, the quest for truth was not just limited to men, but also there were many women parivrajaka's who were wandering in search of truth. The female parivrajaka's sometimes lived with men parivrajaka's, sometimes they lived alone and by themselves. These old type of parivrajaka's had no sangha, had no rules of discipline, and had no ideal to strive for. Very important point. The point number 8 is important. It was for the first time the Blessed Lord organized his followers into a sangha or fraternity and gave them rules of discipline and set before them an ideal to pursue and realize. Now, so far as the some of the scholars are of the opinion that the Buddha modeled the Buddhist organization or sangha on the basis of the republics that time, because we know that the Buddha himself was a part of a republic. And they had assembly democracies as we know them today, that the people used to assemble and they used to deliberate and discuss about the matters related to community, and they used to take collective decisions. And that's what we have seen in the life of the Buddha himself. And in his own kingdom, there was a kind of a proto-democracy, the assembly democracies, where people used to assemble together and deliberate on their collective concerns. So the Buddha organized the floating body of wanderers into a sangha or fraternity and gave them rules of discipline and set before them an ideal to pursue and realize. So if we underline important words in this particular verse number 9, isn't it? The Buddha organized his followers into a sangha or fraternity. Very important word, fraternity. Baba Sahib equating sangha with fraternity is very important, because that's kind of a solidarity of the people who are following the same path, who are striving for the same the same ideal. And the second layer of this last verse is the rules of discipline. So it's very important to have some rules to govern those body of people organized into fraternity. and to have an ideal to perceive and realize, isn't it? So there has to be an ideal before them to realize and perceive. So you see, these are the three important layers that the Buddha organized his followers into Sangha or fraternity, and he gave them the rules of discipline, which is called Vinaya, and set before them an ideal to perceive and realize. And we know what ideal there is for the Bhikshu Sangha, the ideal to idealize the ideal society, to create a model of a new society. That was the ideal before the Sangha. So with this preliminary discussion on of section 1, we will move on to 2, which is also very important. And it's also revolutionary if we look at all those points very systematically. Admission to the Sangha. Who was to be the member of the Sangha? What was the condition for a person to become a member of the Sangha? Why I'm reading it through? Because I think they are like guidelines or the points that needs to be kept in mind. And whenever there is a need to elaborate, I would resort to elaboration of those points. So the subsection 2 goes on like this: admission to the Sangha. The Sangha was open to all. This is very important. The Sangha was not confined to a particular group of people or a caste or class or gender. The Sangha, the Buddhist Sangha, by its very nature, is open to all. The Sangha was open to all. In fact, the Buddha was the first person who opened the Sangha for the people from all the backgrounds, irrespective of where they come from. Whether you are a man or a woman, whether you are poor or rich, it doesn't matter. You can all be the members of the Sangha. Second, there was no bar of caste. The Buddha didn't, stop people from entering the Sangha because of their caste background or Varna background. There was no bar of sex. Buddha didn't stop people, if you are women, Buddha didn't stop people to enter into Sangha. There was no bar of status. Caste has had no place in Sangha. Social status had no place in the Sangha. Very important. Because everywhere we go, we bring our social status along with it. And we see it all the time in the communities around us, in the public spheres, that people try to bring their social status wherever they go. And in the Buddhist Sangha, there is no place for social status. Very important. Inside the Sangha, all were equal. So once you are a part of the Sangha, you are equal to everybody. Inside the Sangha, rank was regulated by worth and not by birth. Very important. Because you see, as you see in the caste system, the ranks are regulated by what is called your birth in a particular slot or in the structure. But in the Buddhist Sangha, the rank was regulated by worth, not by birth. This is a very important point, because the birth determined, but birth didn't determine your worth. It was your worth that determined your position. So you see this verse number 8 is very important. Inside the Sangha, rank was regulated by worth and not by birth. As the Blessed Lord said, the Sangha was like the ocean and bhikshus were like the rivers that fell into the ocean. Very important, Sima. You see this Buddha's example coming all the time in his teachings, that his Sangha was like ocean. And once you are a part of the Sangha, you cannot determine the individuality, your individual background is lost in that, isn't it? Just like when the rivers enter into the ocean, it's very difficult to figure out by picking up the handful of the water, saying that this water belongs to Narmada, this water belongs to Tapi, this water belongs to this river, this water belongs to that river. It's very difficult. So the Buddha always compared his Sangha with the ocean. So the verse number 9 is a revolutionary itself. It says, as the Blessed Lord said, the Sangha was like the ocean and the bhikshus were like the rivers that fell into the ocean. The river has its separate name and separate existence. But once the river entered the ocean, it lost its separate name and separate existence. It becomes one with the rest. Same is the case with the Sangha. When a bhikkhu entered the Sangha and he became one with the rest, like the water of the ocean, he lost his caste, he lost his status, so said the Lord. The only distinction observed inside the Sangha was that of sex. The Bhikkhu Sangha was separate in its organization from the Bhikshuni Sangha. The entrants into the Sangha were divided into two classes, Shramaneras and Bhikshus. Anyone below 20 could become a Shramanera. By taking the Tisarana and by taking the 10 precepts, a boy becomes a Shramanera. I follow the Buddha, I follow the Dhamma, and I follow the Sangha are the Tisaranas. I shall abstain from killing. I shall not commit theft. I shall follow Brahmacharya. I shall not tell untruth. I shall abstain from drink. I shall abstain from taking food at an untimely hour. I shall abstain from indecent and immoral acts. I shall abstain from ornamenting and decorating myself. I shall abstain from luxuries. I shall abstain from the love of gold and silver. These are the 10 precepts. So these are the 10 precepts that are important for the Shramanera. A Shramanera can leave the Sangha at any time and become a layman. A Shramanera is attached to a bhikkhu, and spends his time in the service of the bhikkhu. He is not a person who has taken parivraja. So Shramanera has to follow the Tisarana and he has to take 10 precepts as his guide, but they are not members of the Sangha. He is not a person who has taken parivraja. The status of a bhikkhu has to be reached in 2 stages. So there are 2 stages to reach the status of a bhikkhu. The first stage is called parivraja and the second is called upasampada. It is after upasampada that he becomes a bhikkhu. A candidate who wishes to take parivraja with a view ultimately to become a bhikkhu has to seek a bhikkhu who has the right to act as an upadhyaya or upadhyaya. A bhikshu can become an upadhyaya only after he has spent at least 10 years as a bhikkhu. Such a candidate, if accepted by the upadhyaya, is called a parivrajak and has to remain in the service and tutelage of the upadhyaya. After the period of tutelage ends, it is his upadhyaya who has to propose the name of his student to a meeting of the Sangha specially called for the purpose of upasampada, and the student must request the Sangha for upasampada. The Sangha must be satisfied that he is a fit and a proper person to be made a bhikkhu. For this purpose, there is a set of questions which the candidate has to answer. Only when the Sangha grants permission that upasampada is granted and the person becomes a bhikkhu, the rules regulating entry into the Bhikshuni Sangha are more or less the same as the rules regulating the entry into the Bhikkhu Sangha. So you see that there are technical points that we need not have to keep in mind, but the things to keep in mind is the various stages, various categories within the Sangha, and how one becomes a bhikkhu. There are various stages from Shramanera to bhikkhu, and Baba Ambedkar has elaborated them in the section 2. So I'm going to finish the subsection 3 as well, going to read through it, and we'll see the point where we need to gloss upon. The bhikkhu and his vows. Now this you have to bear in mind, the distinction between a bhikkhu and layman. A layman or a Shramanera takes precepts, his obligation is to follow them. Now layman and a Shramanera takes precepts, but his obligation is to follow them. A bhikkhu, besides taking precepts, takes them also as vows which he must not break. If he breaks, he becomes liable to punishment. Okay. Now these are the vows that a bhikshu needs to take, and if the bhikshu breaks it, he or she is liable to punishment. So what are the vows? A bhikkhu vows to remain celibate. Okay, that's very absolutely important for a bhikkhu to remain a celibate. A bhikkhu vows not to commit theft. A bhikkhu vows not to boast. A bhikkhu vows not to kill or take life. A bhikkhu vows not to own anything except what the rules allow. No bhikkhu is to possess more than the following 8 articles. 1. 3 pieces of cloth to cover his body. The lower garment called Antarvaska, upper garment called Uttarasanga, covering garment against cold called Sanghati. The more proper word is Sanghati. 3 garments are allowed for a bhikkhu or bhikshuni. A girdle for the loins, an alms bowl, a razor, a needle, a water strainer. You see, this is the only possession of the bhikshu. And if you look at the Buddhist art, it's very beautifully described. When the Buddha attained to Mahaparinibban, his possessions are depicted, and they are hang over two sticks. So the Buddha is leaving the world and remaining leaving behind only those few possessions, isn't it? It's very, very touching scene in the Buddhist art, the Mahaparinibban of the Buddha. And the more you look into those scenes, you begin to see a lot of the teachings of the Buddha, So even when the Buddha leaves the world, he leaves this a few possessions behind. It's true for all of us. When we leave this world, we do not have a lot of things to possess. We have very little, we have nothing to take with us in reality. So you see, these are the basic things that a bhikshu needs, and that is what is the ideal, maybe for all of us, to be content with what we need, isn't it? Instead of accumulating things after things after things, what we need is very important than what we gather, which is not important for us or necessary for us. And I think this verse number 8, in a sense, shows that how much little we need to sustain or survive. So 9, a bhikkhu takes the vow of poverty. He must beg for his food. He must live on alms. He must sustain himself only on 1 meal a day. Where there is no vihar built for the Sangha, he must live under tree. See, there's a very, very, guidelines for the bhikshus are very clear. They are very, very clear. A bhikkhu does not take a vow of obedience. Outward respect and courtesy to his superiors is expected a bhikkhu does not take a vow of obedience. Outward respect and courtesy to his superiors is expected from the novice. His own salvation and his usefulness as a teacher depends on his self-culture. He is to obey not his superior but the Dhamma. His superior has no supernatural gift of wisdom or of absolution. He must stand or fall by himself. For that, he must have freedom of thought. Any breach of a vow taken by a bhikkhu result in an offense of parajika, and the punishment for parajika is expulsion from the Sangha. Now, the verse number 10 is useful for each of us, isn't it? And I think this is very important. In any organization, this is very important. We see our Buddhist organizations, which are very, very, very strict hierarchical regimes. And that has been a problem in a Buddhist history, to have this kind of strict regimes. So, of course, there has to be some kind of hierarchy based on the work, as Baba Ambedkar mentioned in the previous sections. But I think the verse number 10 is of great significance. So a bhikkhu does not take a vow of obedience. The bhikshu is not taking the vow of obedience, in the sense that he is not taking refuge to any person. He is not taking refuge to any guru. He is not taking refuge to any he is not in servitude to any higher up. Outward respect and courtesy to his superior is expected from the novice. Now, that's but natural to have the respect, outward respect and courtesy to the one who is superior to him in terms of their practice. But it doesn't mean that they should be completely obliged to them. His own salvation and his usefulness as a teacher depend on his self-culture. So on his own development, his salvation is depending on, and his usefulness as a teacher depends on his own self-culture, his own practice, his own commitment. He is to obey not his superior, but the Dhamma. He has only the authority of the Dhamma to be obeyed. His superior has no supernatural gift of wisdom or of absolution. He must stand or fall by himself. Very, very important. This is true for all of us, not just for bhikkhus or bhikshunis. He must stand or fall for himself, by himself. That means one has to take the full responsibility of one's culture, of one's being, of one's character, of one's life. isn't it? He must stand or fall by himself. For that, he must have freedom of thought, isn't it? So, it's very important that Baba Ambedkar brings this very important point, even in the organizational setup. If we think about the organization where people are obliged to, superiors or to follow certain things, here Baba Ambedkar is saying that if a person has to be dependent on nothing, the only way by which they cannot be dependent on anybody is by having the freedom of thought. So bhikshus must have the freedom to think for themselves, because upon them only depends their rise and fall. And this ability to have the freedom of thought is very important in any organization. Otherwise, the organizations becomes just mechanistic. They become like serviceable to the interest of the certain groups of people, isn't it? And that's why I think this verse number 10 is very important. And I'm going to reread the verse number 10 so that it begins to make sense to us. A bhikkhu does not take a vow of obedience. Outward respect and courtesy to his superiors is expected from the novice. His own salvation and his usefulness as a teacher depend on his self-culture. He is to obey not his superior but the Dhamma. His superior has no supernatural gift of wisdom or of absolution. He must stand or fall by himself. For that, he must have freedom of thought. Freedom of thought is very important. The ability to think for oneself is very important, and that is often praised, all the time praised by Baba Ambedkar. In other words, the member of the Sangha cannot be at the service of the superior for meeting the goals which are not the goals of the Sangha. The bhikkhu and ecclesiastical offenses. So parajika means complete downfall. So if a bhikshu commit 4 offenses, parajika, they have to be removed from the Sangha. So what are these 4 offenses? Any breach of vows taken by a bhikkhu is an offense against the Dhamma. In addition to these offenses, there were certain other offenses to which he was also liable. They were also called Sangha disease, ecclesiastical offenses. The list of such offenses included in the Vinay Pitak are 13. They are allied to the parajika. Now, parajika means the vows which the bhikshu have taken, and if they don't meet their vows, they are expelled from the Sangha. What are the parajikas? 4 parajikas. Okay. They are the vows of the bhikshus. What is the first vow of the bhikshu? A bhikkhu vows to remain celibate. So if he choose not to remain a celibate, they are automatically out of the Sangha. A bhikkhu vows not to commit theft. If they are caught thieving, they are not part of the Sangha. A bhikkhu vows not to boast. If they unnecessarily boast of their accomplishments, that I am this, I am that, I have reached to that level, I have this power, I have that power. If they boast like that, they cannot be the members of the Sangha. A bhikkhu vows not to kill or take life. So if the bhikshu is resorting into violence, they are not part of the Sangha. And it's called parajikas. They are the 4 defeats. Committing them leads to the demembership of the Sangha. So there are other offenses. There are 13 offenses which are called Sangha disease. Okay. Now the bhikshus need to practice some restraints. The bhikshu has to practice certain restraints, and in the subsection 5, Baba Ambedkar has detailed them out, the bhikkhu and the restraints. Besides sailing clear of offenses, a bhikkhu must observe certain restrictions and cannot be as free as others. So there are some restrictions on the bhikshus. They cannot be as free as others. One set of such restrictions are called Nisaggiya Pachitya. It contains 26 restrictions to be observed by the bhikshu. They relate to accepting gifts of robes, woolen mats, bowl, and medical requisites. They also relate to the acceptance of gold and silver, engagement of a monk in buying and selling, and appropriation of property given to the Sangha to himself. The punishment for breach of these restrictions is restoration, Nisaggiya, and expression of repentance, Pachitya. Besides this restriction, there are other restrictions which a bhikshu has to observe. They are called Pachitya. They number 92. So you see, there are various sets of rules, gradual sets of rules. So if you commit certain breaches of vows, you are out of the Sangha. If you do something, there is a way to deal with that. If you cannot restrain yourself, if you break those restraints, then there is a method by which you will be punished. Okay. And then there is guidelines for the good conduct. Now this is all very nice because this they sort of make a person responsible towards what is called the principles of good conduct. And in all the communities, all societies, very important to have the principles or guidelines for the good conduct. The bhikshu and good conduct rules. A bhikshu must behave well because they have to be ideal before the community. He should be a model person in his mode and manner of behavior. In order to secure this purpose, the Blessed Lord framed a number of good conduct rules. The Vinaya are called the good conduct rules. The way Baba Ambedkar chooses various words, they are very important. To Vinaya, Baba Ambedkar calls good conduct rules. These good conduct rules were called Sekhiya Dhamma, then number 75. You see, Sekhiya means training, the rules for training. We are not born with these rules to practice, to follow. Therefore, we have to train ourselves. And those who are training like this, they are called the Sekhiya. Isn't it? And the rules of training are called the Sekhiya Dhamma. It might look very technical to us, but once we begin to understand the intention of the Buddha as to why he wanted to constitute the Sangha, these all rules begin to make a lot of sense to us. And these rules are very important for any society, for any community, for any organization to be able to lead the larger community. Now, the subsection 7, the bhikkhu and the trial of offenses. So it is not that if you commit a mistake, you will be automatically debarred from the membership of the Sangha. There has to be the trial of offenses. And here lies the seeds of what is called the parliamentary or democratical processes, isn't it? The Sangha was a mini democracy, as it were. It was not a dictatorship. It was not an anarchical state. There were rules to follow. There were methods by which a person was to be treated if they conducted any offense. So the bhikkhu and the trial of offenses, the enactment of these acts and omissions were not a mere formality. They were legal in substance, involving definite charge, trial, and punishment. So they had certain legality within the Sangha. Isn't it? These rules had a status of a law, isn't it? They are the law of good governance. And as is true with any law, there has to be, definite charge, trial, and punishment. No bhikkhu could be punished without a trial by regularly constituted court. Very important, isn't it? If anybody has to be punished, anybody has to be given anything related to the breaking of the laws of good conduct, isn't it? There has to be a trial by a regularly constituted court. The court was to be constituted by the bhikkhus resident at the place where an offense had taken place. No trial could take place without a proper number of bhikshus required to constitute a court. That means the quorum is very important. If there was to be a trial, there has to be a court. The court will be constituted by the senior bhikshus, and there will be a proper number of bhikshus to conduct the trial. No trial would be legal without a definite charge. There has to be a definite charge, isn't it? The charge cannot be, unclear. There has to be a clear, defined charge. No trial could be legal if it did not take place in the presence of the accused. So a person accused has to be there. You cannot conduct a trial ab absentia. If the person is not present, you cannot conduct the trial. No trial could be legal if it did not take place in the presence of the accused. No trial could be legal if the accused had not been given the fullest opportunity to defend himself. So those people who are accused, they have all the opportunity to defend themselves. The following punishment could be awarded against a guilty bhikshu or bhikkhu. 1. Tarjaniya karma, warn and discharge. Tarjani. This mudra we see all the time. This is called Tarjani mudra, and it's warning and discharge. Tarjaniya karma. So the warning will be given. Niyasha karma, declaring insane. A bhikshu may be declared insane. They might be out of their minds. Pravarjaniya karma, expulsion from the Sangha. Utshekpaniya dhamma, karma, boycott. They could be boycotted. Parivasa karma, they could be expelled from the vihar. So very important. This what was the nature of the punishment? They could be warned and discharged. Okay, now you're warned, don't do this. Discharged. Then they might be out of their minds. They might be insane. Then they might be expelled from the Sangha. This was the highest punishment, expelling from the Sangha itself. And they can be boycotted for a certain period of time. And then they can be expelled from the particular vihar, isn't it? Expulsion may be followed by abanna karma. Abanna karma means annulment of dismemberment. It may be followed after granting of pardon granted by the Sangha after being satisfied with the proper performance of parivasa karma. You see, so they can be brought back into the Sangha, isn't it? So it is not that, unless you commit pachitya, parijika offenses, there is a scope for you again to come back after having these punishments, which are enumerated by Baba Sahib Ambedkar here in terms of the 5 guilt, punishments. So I'm going to finish it. I'm going to finish this part, and then I'm going to come back and gloss over some of the very important things that we need to know. The Bhikkhu and confession, the most original and unique institution created by the Blessed Lord in connection with the organization of the Bhikkhus, was the introduction of confession called Uposat. Now, there is a lot of confusion about Uposat. What happens at the time of the Uposat? There it is related with Patimokha. So let me read it through, and then I'm going to come back and going to gloss over it. Okay. The Blessed Lord realized that it was possible to enforce what he had laid down as offenses, but he had laid down certain restrictions which were not offenses. He said that the restrictions were most intimately connected with building up of character and maintaining character, and that there was equal necessity to see that they were observed. But the Lord could find no effective way of enforcing them. He therefore thought of confession in open as a means of organizing the bhikshu's conscience and making it act as a sentinel to guard him against taking a wrong or a false step. The confession was confined to the transgressions of restrictions, which are called patimokha. For a confession, there was to be a meeting of the bhikkhus of a given locality. Very important, of a given locality. There were to be 3 such meetings in a fortnight, one each on Chaturdashi, Panchadashi, Ashtami. On that day, the bhikkhus may fast. That is why the day is called Uposat. At the meeting, a bhikkhu reads the restrictions one by one contained in the Patimokha. After reading a restriction, he says to the assembled bhikkhus, I take it that none of you have transgressed this rule. That is why you are silent. He says this 3 times, then deal with the next restriction. A similar confessional meeting is required of the Bhikshuni Sangha. On a confession, a charge and a trial may follow. On a failure to confess, any bhikkhu may report a transgression if he was a witness to it, and then a charge and trial may follow. You see, organizing people is not an easy job. It's one of the most difficult jobs. And for that, it's not just enough to have the Vinaya, but there has to be what is called the way to organize the people so that their character is built, their conscience is organized. In order to do that, the Buddha has come up with this very unique sort of a method by which to organize people, and their conscience and build their character. So there are the set of rules called Patimokha, and the Patimokhas are recited in the localities where there is a Bhikshu Sangha. And a senior Bhikkhu will read them one by one, recite them one by one, and he will ask 3 times, has anybody committed any offense pertaining to this particular Patimokha? And if they have committed, they will report that, and then the trial and the charges will be, the court will be instituted and the trial will be conducted. So in a way, you are mindful, this is how you are cultivating your mindfulness of the Vinaya rules or Patimokha. And if the people are silent, but if somebody knows that he has committed this or that kind of an offense, they can report it to the Sangha, and the Sangha can deliberate on that. So you see, this all discussion about the first part, the Sangha and its processes, and how one becomes a member of the Sangha, how one becomes, sent away from the Sangha, how to guard the good conduct of the members of the Sangha, what happens if they conduct the misconduct, what is the process for that. So you see, the Buddha was a very wise teacher. The Buddha was a great organizer. That's why we see that the Buddha's teachings has been surviving for such a long period of time, even if it has weakened or disappeared to some extent in India. The Buddha's teachings or the Buddha's Sangha continues in different parts of the world. And even in India today, there is a large number of people who are bhikshus or bhikshunis, and therefore I think this section is very important as to how what is the Sangha, who becomes the member of the Sangha, how they become the member of the Sangha, how they are supposed to live their lives, how they are supposed to practice the good conduct, and if they break or if there is a breach in the good conduct, what is the process, and if they do not follow, how they keep on building their character or conscience by continuously practicing what is called uposat, isn't it? Now the uposat is just reduced down to fasting on that day and practicing the Dhamma on that day. That's very good in a way, but the uposat, or the way it is practiced, it was by its nature was to build a strong foundation of the Sangha, and the strong foundation of the Sangha is very important. So for us today, it's very important how we can bring these practices of Patimokha in the communities, how we can bring these practices of good conduct in the communities. In other words, how we can organize the Buddhists. I think the Sangha as an organization of the Buddhist has this very important role to play as to how to organize the Buddhist around. And these are bigger questions that needs to be thought through. And I think Baba Ambedkar has given us a lot of hints as to how the Buddhist can be organized. So what I will do, I will stop here and open up the class for any further discussion or anything that you would like to discuss in the class today. Anything?
Sir, Jai Bhim, sir.
Yes, yes.
With the passing of time, means the oldest rule and regulations set by Buddha in those days,
Hmm.
still it's sustaining at the present time also. It means it's not affecting the single segment of Sangha. And following all these rules and regulations are making them sustainable till date.
True.
That's the beauty, I think, no, sir?
Yes, yes, yes. You see, there has been a lot of historical discussion about Vinaya, and Xuanzang came to India to take the Vinayas, or to understand the rules of Vinayas, because there were a lot of confusions about the rules of Vinayas, and more than 300 rules for the bhikshus, and more than 225, 227 rules for the bhikshus, and more than 300 rules for the bhikshunis, so many rules. And there was a lot of confusion over them. And even today, I think there is a lot of confusion about what are the minor rules on the major rules. There was a discussion on the Buddhist Sangha as to what constitute the major rules and minor rules. In fact, it is said that the Buddhist Sanghas were split not on the doctrinal points, but on the basis of the rules, isn't it? The rules of Vinaya. So, there is a continuity from the antiquity to the present, that the Bhikshu Sangha is still there in a lot of other countries. And as I said, that in India also, when the Bhikshu Sangha or the Sangha disappeared, the lot of Buddhists were making an effort to sustain without the Sangha the Buddhism in India. And there are ample evidences to prove that the people tried very hard when the organized Sangha was gone because of several reasons. And I think it's flourishing in Sri Lanka, in Thailand, in Japan, in Korea. Japan have the Sangha of the married people. There are a lot of distinctions between the way people practice the Sangha. So I think what is important here for us to understand that the organization is very important. Organizing the Buddhist is very important, and on what are all the levels by which the Buddhist can be organized. One of them is the Sangha. And as we have seen that Baba Ambedkar traditionally refused to take to follow the existing Sangha, and there is a lot of discussion on that before Baba Ambedkar converted, embraced Buddha's Dhamma. And then he was told that it's a traditional Sangha, and there is a lot of discussion on that. And Baba Ambedkar has seen through the arrogance of some of the Sangha members when he visited different parts of the world, and he had his understanding of how to build a Sangha, isn't it? And he said somewhere that in his Sangha there will be also bhikshus and upasakas, isn't it? And he said that because the Sangha was an exclusive thing, and the Sangha Diksha was the only way by which people could become the Buddhist, and there was no Dhamma Diksha for the larger body of people, the Buddhism declined. And he rectified that by what is called instituting Dhamma Diksha. Dhamma Diksha is very important part of Buddhism now. As far as India is concerned, Dhamma Diksha is very important, and we should all take Dhamma Diksha, isn't it? We should all encourage people to take Dhamma Diksha, because that is very important. That's how you become a Buddhist. So, in publicly, and we know that Baba Ambedkar has himself taken Dhamma Diksha in 1950 when he was to go out for the Buddhist conferences. So it's continuing in different parts of the world. The Sangha is continuing that, and Sangha has contributed a lot to the sustenance of Buddhism. But today we have to rethink as to how we can model the Sangha, what can be the Sangha, what would Baba Ambedkar think about the Sangha, how would he organize Buddhists, what will be the place of good conduct rules. These are all we have to think through continuously, so that we begin to see the ways by which we can organize the Buddhist today.
Sir, can we look this thing into this way, that means in around the world a lot of sanghas are there, and they are following their own set of rules.
Yeah.
And if two people met and they form a sangha and they set a rule for that, the thing is that they are following the principles of Dhamma, and they are taking their life as a Dhamma way.
Yes,
that's important, I think so.
No, I think that's very true, because to qualify a particular group of people as a Sangha, the membership of 4 is important. Okay, that has been a traditional number. Okay, and what is emphasized in Buddhism is what is called the Kalyan Mitrata, the friendship that will take us to the highest, isn't it? It is called Kalyan Mitrata, and the Buddha has said that this is the entire Dhamma. To Ananda, he said that if two people or a group of people can relate with each other and work together, they can definitely achieve a lot. Because sometimes it might be possible for one person to achieve a lot, but if the people practice together, they can achieve a lot. And there are the stories in the Buddhist history, like Sariputra and Moglayan. They were the Kalyan Mitra. They were the fast friends. They were together for their life. Before meeting the Buddha, Sariputra and Moglayan were the best friends. In fact, they decided that if one finds the right path, the other will join automatically. And that's how Mahamoggalayan became the disciple of the Buddha when Sariputra became the disciple of the Buddha. Both were the disciples of Sanjaya Beladiputra. And as soon as Sariputra realized that Buddha is my teacher, Mahamoggalayan joined it, and they were the best friends. They looked after each other, they supported supported each other so well that, you cannot separate one from another. And they were individuals with very different characters, individuals with very different potentials, but they could, blend together. And there is a story of three Aniruddha, where three of them were very best friends. They practiced together. So in Buddhism, the mitrata or metta or fraternity has a very deep connotation. And when Baba Ambedkar uses the word fraternity as a substitute for Sangha, and fraternity as being a very core value in Baba Ambedkar's understanding of Buddha's Dhamma, we can begin to see that how, the Sangha is of the essence, and the Sangic practices is of the essence. How people can, benefit each other, how they can learn from each other, how they can enhance each other, how they can support each other. And that is the beauty of the Buddha's teachings,
Wow, thank you so much, sir, for very insightful. These stories has also means shaped my thinking. Thanks a lot, Sadhu, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we are nearing to the end of our class. If there is there anything anybody would like to comment on, or anybody would like to share before we conclude our class today?
Yeah, I wanted to ask one small doubt.
Yes, sir.
What could be the reason that in other countries the Sangha is more or less intact, and in India only it is fragmented?
Every country has their own problems. It is not that the Sangha in Sri Lanka is united. They have their own nikayas, isn't it? In Sri Lanka also, in Thailand also, such is the case. In Japan also, such is the case. So it is not that the Sangha is united anywhere, isn't it? And that's what is, and it's not a problem. It's not a difficulty, because there are geographical circumstances. There are groups of people who emphasize certain teachings of the Buddha, and they gravitate around those teachings, and they form their Sangha. So it's not, I won't say that it's, if when something expands, it has a tendency to get differentiated into different organizations, and it's not wrong. What is important is for people, as Baba Ambedkar has said, that the practice begins with the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha as the ideal. And if the people continue to follow that anywhere, I think we can say that effectively the people are organized. You cannot have a unified Sangha. It's not possible. You cannot have the one Sangha of the entire world, because the people are different, the communities are different, their histories are different, isn't it? So the kind of Sangha that will emerge in India might be altogether different than what we are looking at in Sri Lanka or in Thailand, isn't it? And it's a process, it doesn't happen in the Buddhist history. There were many Sanghas, but they never fought with each other. They never had a fight. A member of one Sangha can go to the vihar of another Sangha, and they can go there, study there, live there. There are lots of evidences of that. Like the Buddhist cannot, pick up a fight with a person from other Buddhist Sangha. It's not acceptable.
Somewhere in 90s, it was found that our Indian bhikkhus, they were ready to unite under the Bhante from Japan, that is Surei Sasai. But they wanted to quit the Sangha, who was led by Dr. Bhadantananda Kausalyan. And finally that Sangha split, and Bhadantananda Kausalyan was in fact forced to establish at some other place like that Kamthi, which they named after as a Buddha Bhumi. And the Sangha led by Bhadanta Surei Sasaiji, it was means established in Diksha Bhumi, Buddha Vihar. So means they were more interested.
I'm not aware of these histories. but there is Akhil Bharatiya Bhikshu Mahasangha, All India Bhikshu Mahasangha, and there are a lot of good bhikshus which are doing a great amount of work. I know a lot of them who are doing a good amount of work. They are organizing people, they are training the people, and they are doing amazing work, isn't it? So I don't think that the people can have a federation as the way to go ahead. They can have a federation of the Bhikshu Sanghas, because there are so many bhikshus now who are doing so much good work, and they can. I'm sure that there is a need to organize them, and without compromising with the work that they are doing. And I see a possibility of that happening, that the people will come together and the bhikshus will organize themselves. I see that possibility in the coming years.
Sir, in India, I have seen monasteries and the bhikkhus and all other peoples attached to it. They have their own set of things to roll out the Dhamma. These monasteries are nothing but a Sangha, we can call it a small unit of that, no?
Yes.
I think the ideal is set by Baba Sahib Ambedkar. Means as there are many countries, there are many sanghas. In India also we can find a lot of branches, but we have an ideal, and that ideal we can see through the lenses of Buddha and his Dhamma, and
Yes.
we should try to consolidate all, and we need to follow that, and that is what all should follow, because as a follower of Ambedkar, we have a definite path. So there is no need, and there is we can say there is no reason that we can be confused among these all things.
True. So we will go on exploring it, and we will, because this work, this need to organize this need to organize the communities is very important, and it's felt time and again. So we will be certainly finding a lot of things in this part 5 of the Buddha and his Dhamma, which will help us to understand a lot of things. So we will stop here today. Jai Bhim, Namo Buddhaya.
Thank you.